Hi, my name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 78 years old. I spent over 35 years as a librarian at Jefferson Elementary School in Dayton, Ohio. I loved my job, surrounded by kids' laughter, dog-eared storybooks, and the smell of old pages. I always felt I was shaping futures even if no one remembered my name in the grand scheme of things. But now I'm telling my story because something unimaginable happened, something that tore my heart and forced me to realize that love from your own children is not always guaranteed. I had 3 children, Robert, Linda, and Michael. After my husband passed when the kids were young, I worked double shifts, sewed Halloween costumes at night, and helped with every homework assignment, even algebra, which I barely understood myself. Life was busy but happy. I never imagined that decades later, my own children would look at me like I was a burden. It began subtly: a missed phone call, a canceled visit, a hurried excuse about work. At first, I told myself they're just busy. But when my memory started slipping and my knees gave out on cold mornings, they made a decision that would forever haunt me. "Mom, it's for your safety," Robert said one morning, barely looking at me as he scrolled through his phone. "It's just until you get stronger," Linda added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Michael, the youngest, didn't say much. He signed the forms that sent me to Maple Grove Senior Living, a place I had passed countless times on Sunday drives and never thought I'd live in. With one small suitcase, I said goodbye to the home I had built with my own hands. I left behind pictures, memories, and decades of a life well lived. The first night in my new room, the smell of disinfectant hit me like a slap. The bed was too big. The silence was deafening. I waited for footsteps in the hallway, imagining one of my children bursting through the door, telling me it was all a mistake. But they never came. Days blurred into weeks. I kept telling myself that they were busy, that they would visit soon. Sundays came and went, then the second Sunday, and the third. Eventually, the calls stopped. The messages went unanswered. On my 78th birthday, I wore the blue sweater Linda had bought me years ago. I asked the nurse, "Did anyone call today?" The nurse, with soft eyes and a gentle smile, shook her head. "Not yet, Eleanor." They brought a small cake. They sang. They were kind. But it wasn't them. I cried that night, quietly, so my roommate wouldn't hear. I couldn't understand how the people I had given everything to could simply forget me. I had fed them, clothed them, supported them through school, through heartbreak, through every scraped knee and broken heart. And now they had left me here alone. It wasn't just abandonment, it was betrayal. And betrayal from your own children cuts deeper than any knife. The other residents noticed. Some whispered, others nodded in understanding. Nurse Clara, who had worked at Maple Grove for over 15 years, gave me small comforts. She learned how I liked my tea. She remembered my favorite chair by the window. She made me feel like someone still cared. But the truth was, no one could replace my family. It was during those first lonely nights that I made a quiet, almost imperceptible decision. I would stop waiting for them. I would stop hoping for what they were clearly unwilling to give. Instead, I began observing. I noticed the little joys that still existed around me, the laughter of a small group playing cards, the soft melodies of old songs played by the activity coordinator, the warmth of a hand that offered comfort when tears fell unnoticed. I began to write, letters I would never send, memories I thought I had forgotten, stories of my children when they were small, stories of my husband, of the library, of every ordinary moment that had once felt extraordinary. Writing became my rebellion. A quiet act of reclaiming myself. Weeks passed, then months. I started to realize the bitter truth. My children had not forgotten me by accident. They had chosen convenience over care. Their lives had moved on, and I was inconvenient. It hurt. It hurt in ways that no physical ailment ever could. But I refused to let it break me. I remembered the lessons I had taught children for decades. Even when life is unfair, even when people hurt you, you find your own strength. You persevere. And so I persevered. That was the first part of my story, a story of abandonment, a story of quiet heartbreak, a story of betrayal that no mother should ever endure. But it is also the beginning of something else, a path I would walk alone at first, but one that would eventually lead to justice. Because even when the people who should love you the most turn their backs, you are never truly powerless. I had learned a harsh truth. Waiting for my children was futile, but I refused to let bitterness consume me. Maple Grove had become my unexpected sanctuary. The staff and residents were kind, but what I craved most, what I had lost, was the love of my own family. It was in those quiet moments of reflection that I began to notice small details. I had never paid attention to Nurse Clara's patients, Mr. Jenkins' jokes that made the common room echo with laughter, and even the little garden behind the facility where flowers bloomed. Despite the harsh Ohio winters, life still had beauty. Yet the void remained. I started keeping a journal. At first it was simple, notes about my day, the meals I enjoyed, the conversations I had with fellow residents. But soon it became my secret weapon, a record of memories, lessons, and observations. I documented every phone call that never came, every canceled visit, every empty promise. I wrote letters to my children that I would never send, letters full of questions, anger, and hurt. Why did you leave me? I wrote. Was I not enough? Though the words brought pain, they also brought clarity. I began to see my own power again, the power I had long forgotten while focusing on raising others. I was not a passive victim. I was Eleanor Whitmore, a woman who had built a life with her own hands and a heart strong enough to survive decades of love and loss. One morning, a piece of news arrived that would set everything into motion. A lawyer named Mr. Harrison called. At first, I thought it was another telemarketer, but his voice held a tone of urgency. Mrs. Whitmore, I represent your estate. There have been some decisions made about your will that you need to hear immediately. I listened carefully as he explained that my children assumed they would inherit everything, but in truth, I had the power to decide otherwise. They thought my absence in age made me powerless. They thought that by sending me to Maple Grove, they had control. They were wrong. I spent the next few weeks in careful planning. I reviewed every account, every property deed, every piece of jewelry, every investment I had made over the years. Everything was mine, legally and fully, and if my children wanted to treat me like a burden, they would not benefit from my life's work. Instead, I chose people who had shown me love when my own children did not. Nurse Clara, the staff members who celebrated my birthday, and even some residents who had become like family. I wrote letters naming them as beneficiaries, ensuring that kindness, not neglect, would be rewarded. Meanwhile, the children's calls became sporadic. Linda called once, nervously, to ask about a tax form. Robert texted, pretending to care about my health. Michael sent an email, vague and impersonal. They did not know what I had planned. They did not suspect the storm that was quietly building behind my calm exterior. I kept my silence. I learned that patience could be more powerful than anger. Every phone call they ignored, every birthday they skipped, only strengthened my resolve. Life at Maple Grove was no longer about waiting for them. I immersed myself in activities, reading to children who visited, leading small gardening projects, and teaching fellow residents to document their own stories. I realized that I was still capable of impacting lives, even if it was not my own children's. And yet, every evening when I returned to my room, I thought of the betrayal. The pain of abandonment lingered like a shadow. I refused to let it consume me entirely, but I did not forget. Then came the day of my first victory. Mr. Harrison arrived with the finalized documents. He explained how the children had assumed they were entitled to inherit everything. Their names were listed on old drafts, but the updated will and the accounts were clear. The only ones who would benefit were those who had shown me respect, care, and kindness over the years. I felt a quiet satisfaction. It was not vengeance in the traditional sense, but justice. The people who had truly loved me would receive the rewards. Those who abandoned me would gain nothing. I still remember the moment my eldest son, Robert, found out. He arrived at Maple Grove unexpectedly, hoping to charm me into forgiveness. I just wanted to see you, Mom, he said, voice shaking. I thought you'd understand, Linda added, eyes welling with tears. Michael stood behind them, silent, unsure of what to say. I smiled, not cruelly but firmly. I do understand, I told them. I understand that love must be earned, not assumed, and I understand that actions have consequences. Their expressions shifted from confusion to shock as Mr. Harrison quietly explained. The legal decisions, every missed visit, every empty promise, every abandoned birthday had consequences, and the law now recognized what my heart already knew. I was not powerless. I was not forgotten. I was in control. After their stunned departure, I allowed myself a moment of relief. I had been strong all my life for my children, for my students, for strangers even. But now I was strong for myself. I realized that the betrayal I had suffered had ultimately led to empowerment I never expected. I started to share my story with the residents. I encouraged them to recognize their own worth, to understand that neglect from those who should love you most does not define your value. Maple Grove became a place of empowerment, not just survival. As I sit in my room today, looking out at the Ohio sunset, I feel a mix of sadness and triumph. My children's neglect hurt me, yes, but it also taught me something invaluable, that strength, dignity, and self-respect are more powerful than resentment. That kindness and care when genuine always leave a legacy, even if it is not the one you expected. And most importantly, I have learned that life is not about waiting for people to love you. It is about loving yourself enough to take back your power when others try to take it away. But I had learned something far more important. Strength is quiet. Patience is sharp, and justice can arrive softly, but it always arrives. When I received the finalized documents from Mr. Harrison, I felt a quiet calm settle over me. Years of neglect, broken promises, and abandoned birthdays had led to this moment. For the first time in decades, I was not waiting for someone else to define my worth. I defined it myself. Robert, Linda, and Michael had assumed that age and distance would make me powerless. They had believed that sending me to Maple Grove Senior Living would silence me, weaken me, and let them claim what they wanted by default. They were wrong. The first to confront me was Robert. He stormed into Maple Grove one chilly afternoon, trying to mask panic with anger. "Mom, we need to talk. We didn't know," he stammered. Didn't know what I asked calmly, seated in my favorite chair by the window. My hands rested on the armrests, steady and composed. "You've changed the will?" Linda added, her voice trembling. I looked at them both, unflinching. I changed nothing. I simply remembered what I had always known, that love must be shown to be real, and actions have consequences. Michael, the youngest, finally spoke, his voice small. "Mom, we didn't think." "You didn't think," I repeated, letting the weight of those words linger. "You didn't think to visit me. You didn't think to call me. You didn't think to remember my birthday. But you did think to expect my life's work as your right." They went silent. The truth hung heavy between us. I had forgone confrontation for decades, choosing patience, forgiveness, and hope. But the hope had ended when the visits stopped. The forgiveness had ended when birthdays passed without acknowledgement. And now they saw that consequences were real. With the lawyer present, I read aloud the updates to my will and accounts. Nurse Clara, the staff members who had cared for me, and even a few residents who had become my chosen family were the beneficiaries. My children had no legal claim. Shock registered on their faces. Robert's jaw tightened. Linda's hands shook. Michael's eyes filled with disbelief. "It's not cruelty," I explained, my voice steady. "It's recognition. Recognition that care and kindness matter more than entitlement. Recognition that love, when absent, cannot be demanded, it must be earned." I left them standing there, stunned, while Maple Grove staff quietly nodded in approval. In that moment, I realized that true power does not roar. True power is quiet, deliberate, and unwavering. After they left, I allowed myself to breathe. For years, I had felt powerless. For years, I had cried alone on my bed, wondering why my children had abandoned me. But that feeling was gone. I spent the next week celebrating life in my own way. I organized reading sessions for the local children, planted tulips in the garden with Mr. Jenkins, and hosted small dinners with friends and staff. Maple Grove became more than a senior living facility. It became my community, my chosen family, and my sanctuary. The emptiness that had haunted me after being abandoned slowly filled with laughter, joy, and purpose. I learned that being forgotten by blood does not mean being unloved. Months later, the news of the will and its beneficiaries reached local papers. Some neighbors were shocked. Some called it harsh, but most understood. Kindness, after all, should be rewarded. Neglect should not. I never sought revenge. I sought justice, and in that pursuit, I found empowerment. My children's actions had forced me into solitude, but solitude gave me clarity. They had thought they could diminish me. Instead, they helped me reclaim a life I had almost lost. I often think back to the day I first arrived at Maple Grove. I remember the fear, the betrayal, and the loneliness. But I also remember the first kind smile from Nurse Clara, the laughter of residents in the common room, and the quiet moments by the window watching the Ohio sunset. That is where I learned something profound. Life does not end when others abandon you. Life begins again when you embrace your own strength. I am Eleanor Whitmore. I am 78 years old. I worked decades as a librarian, shaping young minds. I was abandoned by my children, forgotten on my birthdays, and left in an old age home. And yet, through patience, courage, and reclaiming my own power, I transformed the ending they expected into a story of triumph. If you are watching this, Remember, your worth is not defined by those who ignore you. Your kindness and your love are never wasted, even if the people closest to you fail to recognize them. Stand tall, stand proud, stand for your YouTube style ending. If you were inspired by Eleanor's story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to follow the rest of our emotional, real-life stories. Share this story to remind someone out there that even in betrayal, there can be strength, justice, and hope. Thanks for watching, and remember, your story matters.